Before we do that, let's take a look at the very simple exercise in the textbook, problem 6-8, which asks about the signaling model. Suppose there are two types of persons, high ability and low ability. And a particular diploma costs a high ability person. Let's say there are two groups, high and low ability. And cost of diploma for high ability is $8,000. And low ability, $20,000. Okay? So in the signaling model, low ability individual incurs higher cost of education, so $8,000, $20,000. Okay? And firms wish to use education as a screening device where they intend to pay $25,000 to workers without a diploma. So pay is not according to, so with diploma and without diploma. So pay with diploma would be, without a diploma would be $25,000. Okay? And with a diploma, they are going to pay K dollars. Okay? The question is, in what range must K be to make this an effective screening device? Okay? So find the K. Okay? That's the question. So effective screening device means person with a diploma must be high ability, right? Person without diploma must be low ability. Okay? That's how you make it into an effective screening device. So basically what we need to do is to find the condition under which high ability individual choose to have diploma and low ability individual choose not to have diploma. Okay? So how do you find it? Okay, so for high ability, what should be the condition? In words, right? For high ability, net benefit from having diploma must exceed net benefit of having no diploma, right? So what is the net benefit of having diploma for high ability? K minus 8,000 because it's their cost. Okay? Must be, let's say, greater or equal to what? $25,000 without diploma, right? Okay, so that's one condition. Okay? So this is the net benefit of having diploma, and this is net benefit of having no diploma. So the condition under which the high ability chooses to have no diploma, have diploma is this. So that means what? K must be greater than or equal to what? $33,000. Okay? And how about the low ability individual? Low ability individual, the condition must be what? Net benefit of having no diploma should be greater than the net benefit of having a diploma. So net benefit of having no diploma is what? $25,000. Because there is no cost to have a diploma. I mean, no diploma, so no cost. Should it be greater than or equal to what? K minus $20,000. Should be, let's say, greater. Okay? So that means what? K must be smaller than $45,000. Get that? Right? So the K, the range of K must be 33,000 and 45,000. Okay? Get it? It's a simple application of the separating equilibrium, right? So separating equilibrium exists when the low ability, high ability individual find the net benefit of having education, having the signal, basically what you say. Having the signal should exceed or equal to the net benefit of having no signal, and low ability should find that the net benefit of having no signal should exceed the net benefit of having a signal. Okay? So, okay? Questions? It's a very simple way of looking at it. So in this case, it should be at least $33,000. So with a diploma, the individual will get higher education, have a diploma. The individual with a diploma will be paid more. Okay, not because the diploma signifies this individual's human capital, but because it signifies this individual has high ability. Okay, it may not be, it may not have anything to do with the diploma. It's just the signal. Okay, now so far we have looked at schooling, like education, like having a college degree or high school diploma. But now, let's think about the post-school human capital investment. So after school, so after finishing the schooling, okay, the investment in human capital does not stop. Okay? Even after you finish your schooling, when you get a job, you will go through a training process, not once actually, a few times at least. Okay? So from time to time, you will go to classes like you're going to school. Okay, and it could be for extended period. It could be for months, right? So in this case, so we are going to study this job training. So first, we're going to talk about the on-the-job training. So and then we will move to the topic related with the human capital, which is very closely related, age, earnings, profile. Okay, so let's think about the on-the-job training. So on-the-job training simply means the training while you are on the job. Okay, so in short, we call it OJT, on-the-job training. Okay, conceptually, there are two kinds of training. One is called the general training. The other one is called the specific training. So what is the general training? General training is a training that gives the trainees a general skill that are equally useful in all forms. Okay? So if you go through this type of general training, okay, you will acquire certain skill. Okay? And this skill is useful not only to your current employer, but also to any other employer. We call it the general training. Okay? And human capital obtained through general training is often called the general human capital. Okay? This is a kind of skills that are equally useful. So, for example, like learning how to drive a car, okay? It's useful not only to a current employer, okay, if there is a need to drive, but also it's equally useful to any employer, okay, that wants you to drive. Okay? So, something like the skills that are generally used. For example, like learning how to use, let's say, Excel programs, right? PowerPoint, for example. That is useful not only to your current employer, but also it's useful to any other employer, right? If you need to use it. So we call that kind of training a general training. Okay? And one big example of general training is, for example, the medical internship. Okay? So if you graduate from a medical school, your education to be a doctor does not stop there. Even after graduation, you go through an internship process. Okay, you get a intern position in a hospital. Okay, not as a student. Actually, you are an intern You are actually an employee, but it's a kind of in-between employee. So what you have to do is, what you get is basically is a continuation of medical training. Okay, so if you think of medical intern, okay, so those skills that are acquired through medical internship are, most of them must be useful not only to the hospital you are doing intern for, but also it's useful to any other hospital that you may work after you finishing your internship, right? So learning how to operate on operate a appendectomy, it must be pretty much the same in any other hospital, right? Okay, so that's one example of general training, like a medical internship training. Okay. And the other type of training, we call it, as I said, a specific training, okay? Or sometimes we call it a firm-specific training, okay? To be more specific, firm-specific training. Okay? So this is the training that gives the trainees the skills that are useful in the firm where it is acquired, but not useful in any other firm. Okay? That's why we call it the specific training. And the human capital you acquire through this specific training is called specific human capital. Okay? And there are many examples of specific training. For example, like learning the mechanism of customized machines, for example, like a lot of companies, big companies, they do not use like general machine. They actually use a customized equipment for their purposes. Okay? For example, let's say you get a job at a bank, okay, and then their system, okay, their internal system that you're gonna use, is not like a Windows. It's like a Windows, Windows 8. It's not like that. They actually design their system to their specific need. Okay, probably it's based on Windows. It could be, okay, but what you see will be quite different from the one that you will see if you go to another bank. Okay, so each bank has their own system. Okay, so let's say learning how to use that system is very important to perform your tasks, right, in that bank. But let's say for example, let's say you move to another bank. Okay, so what you learned in the previous bank is basically of no use because you will have to learn how to use the new system from the beginning. Okay, so that is the example of specific training. So that's the example. Okay, so that's the basic conceptual categorization of training. Probably in most of cases, the training gives you some general skills and some specific skills, right? So it's in reality, it's very difficult to divide each training into general training or specific training. But conceptually, it's important to know that there are two kinds of training. Okay, so some training must be more like a specific training. Some training must be more like a general training. Okay, now to do the training, let's think of a very simple model. In our model, we will consider a two-period model. Okay? So there are only two periods. In the first period, okay, and second period, from firm's point of view, total cost for a worker in each period, we call it TC1 and TC2. Okay, so it shows how much it costs for a worker in each period. And we call the value of marginal product of the worker in each period VMP1 and VMP2. Okay. So since we have two periods, profit maximizing firm should satisfy the total, the marginal cost. Actually, yeah, it's for one additional worker. So marginal cost must be equal to the value of marginal product of labor. Okay, but since there are two periods, we are thinking of two-period model. So in the future, must be discounted. So that's why TC1 plus TC2 divided by 1 plus R, it should be equal to VMP1 plus VMP2 divided by 1 plus R. Okay? Get it? So we don't have to actually match TC1 to VMP1, TC2 to VMP2. What matters is the sum of the costs must be equal to the sum of the benefit. Okay? And what's in the labor cost? Okay. To see that, first let's assume that training takes place only in the first period. Okay? So in this model, if training happens in the first period. In the second period, there is no training. Okay? And let's call the training cost to the firm H. Okay, H is how much the firm pays to train their employee, one additional employee. So TC1 is actually inside, there is a wage, W1. So this is the wage paid to the worker in the first period, plus H if there is training. Okay, H may be 0. Okay, if there is no training, H is 0. Okay. So, or if the firm, even if there is a training, if the firm doesn't pay anything, then H can be 0. Okay. So W1 plus H and TC2, there is no training, so it's just the wage. Okay. So we can say that the condition must be W1 plus H plus W2 divided by 1 plus R must be this. Okay? Get it? That makes sense? Okay, so given this very simple model, let's think about each training in turn, general training and specific training. What you ask here is that who pays for those training? Because this is a consequence on actually the individuals, the workers' wages. Okay. So first think of this, the general training. Okay. So general training means that if the individual gets this skill, it is useful to any other firm. Okay. So logically, to find out who pays for this training, let's start with the last period, the second period. Okay. So what does it mean? Okay. In the second period, what should happen is that think of W2, wage 2. Okay. So in the second period of wage must be equal to VMP2. Okay. It cannot be lower than VMP2. Why? It cannot be lower than VMP2. Why? Okay, think of the general training. Okay, let's think of a case where this individual got a training. Okay, so this individual has now the productivity of VMP2, not only to its current firm, but to any firm. Okay, if the current employer pays less than VMP2 in the second period, what happens? What is likely to happen? The individual will just leave, okay, and go to another firm who's willing to pay more than W2, right? Obviously, okay, because this individual is worth more than, let's say, worth VMP2. Obviously, the other firm is willing to pay up to VMP2. Okay. So what happens here is that if this individual gets general training in the first period, and second period, this individual's productivity is VMP2. Okay, so in this case, the firm should pay VMP2, which is equal to W2. Okay. So what does it mean? It means this must be W2. Okay, VMP2 must be equal to W2. So you just cancel them out. then what means? H must be equal to what? H must be BMP1 minus W1. Or the other, okay, I should say the other way. W1 must be equal to what? BMP1 minus H. Okay? That means in the first period, the worker's actual productivity minus the training cost would be paid to the worker. Okay? So that means, worker actually pays for the cost. Okay? Because the firm just exactly deducts the training cost from the worker's pay. Okay? So VMP1 minus H. Okay? So you can say that, okay, the worker will get the VMP1, but pays H out of its own pocket. Or own pocket. Okay? No, because logically it should be true, because let's say the firm paid for at least a part of the training. Let's say H is not. Let's say W1 is greater than BMP1 minus H. Okay. So let's say the cost of training is $1,000. Let's say the firm paid for $500. Okay. So actually the worker's worth in the first period, let's say, is $2,000. Okay. Minus $1,000 should be paid $1,000. Okay, if the firm does not pay anything for the training. But the firm has paid $1,500. Okay, so that means $500 of the training bill the firm paid for it. Okay, now in the second period, what should the firm do? Okay, let me just back in. BMP1 is, let's say, $5,000. Okay, and H, let's say total training cost is $1,000. Okay. So, but the firm paid, let's say, $500. No, not this is not H. H should be 100. Okay, $1,000. Okay. So the logic goes here is that if it's true, then W1 must be how much? General training must be $1,000. W2 must be $5,000. Okay, H is $1,000. Okay. So basically, they equal. Okay. Now, but let's say the firm paid $500 extra to the worker. Okay. So that means what? That means the firm is willing to pay $500 out of their own pocket. Okay. So if that's the case, obviously this one, okay, exceeds that part. Okay? So what should be done? The firm should what? In the second period, they should pay less, okay, about this part. They have to balance it out. Okay? I paid for training in the first period. Okay? In the second period, okay, I should get the return out of this, giving you a training for free. Okay? So what it means is in the second period, they should pay less than $5,000. That's the only way the firm is willing to pay for the general training. Okay? So if that's the case, the firm is willing to pay for the general training. But what happens here is that if the firm pays less than $5,000, the worker will just move to another company. Okay? Because the worker is worth actually $5,000 after this training. Not only to this firm, but also to any other firm. So instead of, let's say, getting $4,500, the worker will just simply go to another firm, get $5,000. Okay? So knowing that's going to happen, the firm is not willing to give less than $5,000. That means what? The firm should not give anything extra, okay, to the employee in the first place. Okay? So that is the very simple logic of general training. Okay? General training should be paid solely by the worker. Okay? So simply, if it costs $1,000, okay, to train this worker, then from this worker's job, the value of worker's job is $2,000. Simply deduct the total cost, $1,000, and pay the rest. Okay, so $2,000 minus $1,000, you get $1,000. Okay. So which means everything else equal, general training is okay. Then what is the purpose? What is the incentive for the worker? The incentive for the worker must be that even paying the training costs out of their own pocket, if this lifetime income, VMP1 minus H, this is the first period's income for the worker. The second period income is VMP2 divided by 1 plus R. If this sum of the lifetime income exceeds the sum of the income without any training, the worker is willing to get the general training, even paying, okay, the total cost out of his or her own pocket. Okay? So we can say something like this. Let's say without any training, let's say in the first period and second period, the worker's productivity is BMP, let's say BMP 0 and BMP 0. Okay? Without any training, BMP 0 in both periods. With training, the worker's worth is BMP 1 and BMP 2. Okay? So from worker's point of view, whether to get training or not is just to compare the lifetime income with the training and lifetime income without the training. Okay? So lifetime income without the training, for example, if it is competitive market, it's going to be BMP 0 plus BMP 0, 1 plus R. Okay? That's the lifetime income without any training. Okay? If this one is, let's say, less than BMP 1 minus H plus BMP 2 by 1 plus R, then obviously it's worth to participate in training even paying the cost H. Okay. So it is quite possible if, let's say, H is low enough or VMP2 is large enough, then the individual is willing to participate in the training. Okay. So one example that I give you is this lower pay during medical internship. Okay. So medical internship is a general training. So no hospital has any incentive to pay for the training of the interns. Okay, you think about it, right? Even if you pay for the interns, interns training in the first period, in the second period, if you say that okay, I should pay you less than what you are actually worth in the market because I paid for your education in the first period. The doctor, in the rational doctor would say, okay, that's the end of our relationship. Okay, I'm going to the next hospital. Okay, the next hospital is willing to pay the full, okay, wage to this intern, the used to be intern because this firm did not pay anything for their training, so they are willing to pay the full cost, full worth of the person who finished their internship. Okay, so medical interns are not paid much. That's a fact. Okay, not only in this country but also in almost any country, medical interns are not paid much. Okay, they actually paid very little, and they are just they work like they overwork. They are overworked and underpaid. Not only here, but also in almost any country that has a medical internship program. Why? Because it's simple economic reasoning, because no hospital has any incentive to pay for this internship program. Okay. So this, because the internship training is almost completely general. Okay, what you learn here is useful to any place. Okay, now that's for the general training. How about the specific training? Specific training is a little more complicated because in the specific training, okay, the worker and the firm, okay, have something to lose. Okay, so let's think about it. Okay, let's assume that BMP of the worker for the other firm after training is, let's say, BMP 0. So let's say BMP 0 is less than BMP 2. Okay. Now, so there are two cases. What if the firm pays the cost of general training, the specific training? Okay. So the idea goes, in the first period, the firm pays for the training. Okay, so in the first period, W1 is just equal to BMP 1. So the total cost of training is just paid by the firm. Okay, so W1 is just the BMP1. No cost paid by the worker. Okay. So in the second period, what should be done? In the second period, the firm will pay BMP2 minus, okay, the training cost. Okay, with interest actually, BMP2 minus 1 plus RH must be, okay, is paid. So that means what? In the second period, the firm will pay less than BMP2. Okay. And there is a question. Okay. Now, since the worker is paid this amount, okay, the worker has to decide whether to stay or to leave. Okay. So the worker will stay if this number is greater than BMP what? BMP1 or BMP2 or BMP0 or 1. Right. So this is what the firm, let's assume that the firm pays less than or equal to BMP2 minus 1 plus RH. Okay, let me make an example. Previous example. Which is $1,000. Okay. Let's assume that R is 0 to make things simpler. Okay. So let's assume that the firm pays for everything. So that means what? W1 is equal to what? If the firm pays for the full cost of training in the first period, the wage must be how much? $2,000. Okay? Because H is not paid. by the worker. And what should be the W2? Should it be $5,000 minus $1,000. Okay? Should it be 4,000? Okay? Get it? The firm does not pay, the firm pays for the training in the first period in expectation of getting back, okay, the return to the investment in the second period. The firm is not a charity. The firm is not going to pay you, okay, for nothing. The firm expects a return, okay, eventually. So in this case, there are only 2 periods, so the return must happen in the second period. Okay? So this is how the firm is, expecting. Okay, I pay you for the training, $2,000. Then you pay me back in the second period by accepting lower pay. Okay, so but what can happen here is that if, let's say, BMP 0 is, let's say, $41,000, $4,100. Okay, that means the firm, let's say, for example, actually it's not a very good example, but just for the sake of this case, let's say BMP 0 is $4,100. Okay, that means if this worker rejects $4,000 and goes to other firm, the worker will get $4,100. This is actually lower than $5,000. Okay, why? Because this is a specific training. Okay, so the firm is not, the individual is not worth $5,000 to any other firm. It's worth lower than $5,000. It's worth $5,000 to only to this specific company, not to anybody else. $4,100. So what happens? The individual will say, I'm not gonna do this, right? I will just leave the company, okay? And then I'm not gonna, accept $4,000 because I can get $4,100 elsewhere. So if that happens, if the firm knows about this, then this specific training is not going to happen, right? Because the firm has no incentive to pay for the cost of training, knowing that this worker will just leave in the second period. Okay? So it's not going to worth it for the firm. Okay? So that's a problem here. And what if, okay, the last line is that if the training cost goes up, it's not $1,000, let's say it's $2,000, then the situation gets worse. Okay? Because the firm should pay a lot less in the second period. Okay? So that makes the workers more willing to leave this company, even after the specific training. And from the worker's point of view, let's say, what if the worker pays for the training? Basically, the reverse of the problem. Okay? First period, the firm gets W0 minus H. I know, the worker gets, the worker gets, if the worker pays for the training, and W1 must be, let's say, $1,000. Okay? And in the second period, okay, the worker should get at least $5,000 or higher. Okay? So which means that the worker is willing to get the training only when this second period wage is high enough to justify for the training cost that this individual pays. Okay? Because what happens is that if the worker loses his job in the second period, the worker should go to another company. And in the another company, this training is of no use. Okay? So the another company is not going to pay anything for the training this person had. That means what? That means that if this worker loses his job, his training in the first period is just a waste of money. Okay? So the worker will be very risk averse. He's not gonna willing to pay for the training unless there is a guarantee that this worker will keep this job in the second period. Okay? The problem here is that if this training cost is high enough, okay, then the worker is willing to get this training only when the second period wage is high enough. Okay? So if the training is very expensive, then this expensive training will happen only when the employee has a guarantee to have to get the very high pay in the second period. Okay? So in that case, okay, the firm will find it very costly to keep this worker. Okay? So what happens here is that if the firm or the worker only one party pays for the cost, then it's going to be costly. So in the specific training, okay, usually the cost must be shared. Okay? So how? Basically, the firm pays a certain percentage of the cost, and the worker pays for a certain percentage of the cost. Okay? And then since the training cost is low from the employer's point of view, the firm will try to recoup the cost, but it's the cost they try to recoup is not very high enough. Okay? So that means that they are going to, let's say, they paid for $500 in the first period, then they are willing to pay $4,500 in the second period. Okay? So if they paid for $1,000, then W2 is going to be $4,000, right? If H is, let's say, if the cost of the firm is $1,000, then it's $4,000. Okay? But if it's, let's say, $500, then the worker gets $4,500. Okay? So from the employee's point of view, $4,500 is better than what he or she is paid elsewhere. So the employee has no incentive to leave this company, okay, and to get the training. So if they share the cost, okay, so the problem of paying the firm for the total cost is that it can make the second period wage too low, so the worker has no incentive to stay with this company. So that's the one problem. Okay? And then if the employee pays for the whole cost, then the employee is afraid of losing his job in this current company because this training is useless to any other company. So if the worker pays for the total cost, then the worker have to take a whole risk. So the worker is not gonna do that. So that's the okay. So the worker pays for training in the first period, so that the worker has no incentive to quit. Okay, that means it simply means that worker, okay, is paid more here than elsewhere. Okay, and then the firm can do that because the firm paid only a small amount in the first period for the training. Okay? And the firm has no incentive to lay off the worker in the second period, okay? Because the firm is paying $4,500, okay? But the worker is producing $5,000. Okay? So it's cheaper to have this worker. Okay? $5,000 is the worth, and $4,500. Ah, it's so hot. it should work. Oh, the aircon. I forgot about the aircon in this room. What was I saying? Oh, okay. Okay. So the worker has no the employee, since he's paying $4,500, and since the worker is worth $5,000, so the employer is willing to keep this worker. Okay, and this $4,500 is high enough for the worker to stay with this company. Okay, so in this case, there will be sharing of the cost. So the implications for the specific training, one implication is wage is not equal to BMP. Okay. It's this. W1 is just the BMP1 minus delta H. Okay, so delta is the share of firm cost. Okay, and W2 is just a BMP2 minus 1 plus R delta H. Okay. So as you can see, the wages are actually lower than BMP1 and BMP2. Okay. So wage doesn't have to be equal with the BMP. Okay. So what matters is the total lifetime wage should be equal to lifetime BMP. Okay. Not the in each period it doesn't have to be equal. Okay. Okay. And the second thing is that post-training wage must be higher than the alternative wage, because if this amount is lower than BMP0, okay, then the worker is not going to stay. Okay, that means if the worker actually stayed, this must be at least equal to BMP0. So the specific training, okay, if the specific training relationship exists, okay, that means two things. One is that their wages are generally lower than their BMP throughout their life. Okay, even this wage is lower than their BMP, it's still better than the pay they can get elsewhere without any specific training. Okay? So this is a part of specific training, okay? Because specific training is only useful to this company. Okay? So even with a slightly lower pay than their actual BMP, it is actually better than what they can get paid by any other employer. If it's a general training, that's not true, right? If it's a general training, if the worker is paid less than BMP2, the worker will simply move. Okay, but in the specific training, that's not true. The specific training, still the worker can get paid less than BMP2, but still just stay because it's better than elsewhere. Okay. Okay, so from the employer and employees relationship, with the specific training, workers and firms, they both benefit from maintaining this relationship. Okay, why? Because from workers' point of view, this W2 is better than BMP0. Okay, it's better than what they can get elsewhere. So they have an incentive just to stay with this company. From employers' point of view, they are actually paying less than BMP. Okay, so they pay less than what they produce. So the employer has no incentive to lay off this guy. Okay? So both benefit from this relationship. That means there will be a long-term relationship between workers and the firms. Okay? If it's a general training, there is no reason to have a long-term relationship. Okay? Workers can move to any place, okay, without losing anything. Okay? But with the specific training, if the worker moves to another company, the worker will actually get lower pay because this worker's skill is not useful in any other employer. Okay? So with general training, there is no incentive there is no actual incentive for the employer or employees to keep this worker for long term. But with the specific training, there is a clear incentive to maintain this long-term relationship. So this long-term relationship, the examples of the long-term relationship can be seen by the rule that new workers are likely to be laid off first. Usually when the recession hits, the firms that have lots of specific human capital across their workers, generally they lay off the new workers, not the old workers. Why? Because old workers has accumulated lots of specific human capital. Okay, that means the firm is actually paying less than what these workers is actually producing. New workers, okay, in contrast, okay, they are not that valuable, okay, because they don't have much specific human capital. So new workers are likely to be laid off first, okay, in general. And then if you look at the statistics of quitting, okay, how likely the individual is to quit this job. And in most of the data, what you can see is that if you have stayed with this company for a longer period, this worker is less and less, okay, likely to quit this job. Okay? So if quit happens, it usually happens very quickly, like within 1 year or 2 years. After like 3-4 years, it's much more unlikely for the worker to quit this job. Okay. It's too cold. I was getting sleepy. Okay, so that's the one implication. So, young person and old person, who are more likely to quit? Young persons are more likely to quit. Okay, it's because young persons generally have very short tenure or short work experience with the current employer. So they did not accumulate much of specific human capital. So they have very little to lose, even if you go to another company. Well, let's say if you worked for this company for a long period, so you have lots of knowledge about this firm. So your value is much higher in this firm than in any other firm. So if you go to another firm, you will be paid not as much as in the current employer. So long tenured workers have lower incentive, much weaker incentive to quit this job. And this is often observed. Let's say there was a recession, so some workers were laid off. But when the business returns, okay, they have to hire people. And in lots of cases, the employer actually recalls the workers who were laid off in the recession times. Why? Because you don't have to retrain them. It's much cheaper, right? So these workers were laid off, but they had specific human capital. Okay, so when you recall it, okay, you are actually paying W2, which is less than BNP2. So this person's cost is lower than the value. So it's much beneficial to the firm to recall their previous employees, not than to just hire a new person and just go through the training process all over again. So that is the actually these three phenomena are it's pretty common across labor markets, and long-term relationship is very common. Okay. So the last thing that I want to say is that since from the employer's point of view, if you give the worker a specific training, it's much more valuable if this worker stays with you for longer and longer time. Okay, so you train a person. Let's say if this worker just quits only after 1 or 2 years, that means that your actually return from the training, from training the worker is that you are paying W2 less than VMP2. So as long as you can get this extra benefit of having this worker, then you are willing to you want to have this worker. But if this worker just quits after 1 or 2 years, obviously that's not very good. But if this worker gives you 10, 20 years, that's much more valuable. Okay? So you can recoup, basically you are recouping the return of training this worker for longer and longer period. So from the employer's point of view, obviously, the employer has much more stronger incentive to give training to workers who are likely to stay with this company for a long period than to a worker who, the firm expects to quit, after, only a shorter number of periods. Okay? So, how do you find out who's more likely to stay with you or not? It's very difficult to find out, actually. Okay? But what's known in the labor market, especially in Korean labor market, is the female workers have much shorter job tenure than male workers. Okay? So, from employer's point of view, it's more like if you're a female worker and male worker, if everything is equal, then actually statistically, female worker is likely to quit sooner than the male worker. Okay? So from employer's point of view, they may think it's safer or it's more profitable to train male workers than female workers. Okay? So in general, female workers are likely to receive less training than male workers. Simply because the employer thinks that training male workers pays more than training female workers. Actually, this has a very, very serious long-term consequence on female workers' income. I will show you later. Okay. Now we talked about only 2 periods. But think of more of the life cycle. Okay? From the employer or the employee's point of view, what matters when they decide whether to get training or not, or when they decide whether to give training or not, what matters is the basic cost and benefit. Okay? Cost, basically, how much it costs to train this worker, or how much it costs to get the training. But there is a benefit part. What is the return from training? Okay, the return from training is obviously that as long as you work for this job, you can get return out of it. So which means that younger and older workers, who are more likely to get training? Younger or older? Younger workers or older workers? Younger workers. Why? Because younger workers have more time to get the return from the training. Is simply, right? You acquire the skill, you expect to use this skill for 20 years. But if you're old, let's say you expect to use this skill for only 2 to 3 years, you are unlikely to get the training. Okay? So that means, this marginal return, marginal revenue from the training generally goes down when you get older. So it's marginal revenue at age 20, marginal revenue at age 30. Okay? So that means usually the individuals, the amount of training the individual gets smaller and smaller when they get older and older. Okay? So younger individuals are likely to invest much more time in getting training, than the older workers. So, while they are being trained, it's more likely that they should pay for the cost, right? So younger workers get more training and they have to pay higher cost because they get more training. Okay? So in general, their income must be lower because of paying for the training. Okay, so with this training, we can just draw a theoretical shape of age earnings profile. What is age earnings profile? It's simply the relationship between earnings and age. Okay, so this is age and that's the dollars. So what you can think of is that age earnings profile must be upward sloping. Okay, why? Because while they are young, they invest more in the training. Okay, so they spend more of their earnings in more of the earnings for training. Okay, so their earnings will be lower because they spend more time and money in the training. And as they get older, since they do to spend less and less in training, so their income will increase. Okay, and that's the first thing. First thing is that older people pay less for their training, so their income must go up. Second, okay, you train yourself right now, you will get the return, while you get older and older. So even if you have lower income in this period with the training, okay, your income will go up because you have training now, so you will get return in while you are getting older. So earnings will go up while the individual get older because first thing is that they invest less in human capital. So they pay less for their training. Second, they are collecting the returns from earlier investment. Okay? But since they are getting less and less training while they get older, the speed of acquiring a new human capital will get slower and slower. Okay? So at the end, it's not going to change much. Okay? So this is how the age earnings profile is theoretically, okay, it's theoretically imagined. Okay? Start low pay and gets more and more, gets training first, and then later they collect the return from the training and they pay less and less for training. So the income will increase, but with slower and slower speed. Okay. Actually, if there is no training whatsoever, let's say if there is no training after school, the age earnings profile doesn't have to have this shape. Actually, if there is no training, it is quite possible that age earnings profile is simply flat. Right? You acquire a certain level of human capital while you are in school, and you don't add anything. Which means what? Which means that you don't pay anything for training. Okay? You get no skills, so pretty much it should be flat if there is no training whatsoever after school. But after school training should be increased this way. So this is a theoretical shape of age earnings profile. What is the actual shape? Actual shape is pretty similar. Okay. So this shows age earnings profile to 2013 for men. So this is the highest is university or higher, this vocational college, high school, less than high school. What you see here is that this shape itself is very similar to this shape. Okay? Usually the slope is steeper in young, and it generally slows down while they are old. Okay? The shapes are similar. So that means okay, there is a post-school investment in human capital. Okay, because without any post-school investment, it should be something like this, pretty much, just a flat. Okay, like a high school here, like a university here. It should be flat. Okay, because they just simply get the return from their own schooling investment. But in actual shape, actually it's increasing. So that means there must be post-school investment in human capital. And that's the first thing. Second thing is generally, higher education group has steeper slope. Okay? So as you can see, the lesson high school is actually pretty much flat. Actually, there is not much of increase. There's some increase in the earnings, but it's not that much. But as you can see, that high school it's a slope is steeper, and the university is the steepest. So for that reason, while they are young, the wage differential across education group is small, relatively. They are old, the differential is big. Okay? If there is no post-school education, post-school investment, the theoretically young and old, the wage differential must be pretty much the same. Okay? But in reality, the young group, this is small. Old, much bigger. Okay? So actually in textbook we call this fanning out. It's like a fan. It's like a fan. And then as you just unfold your fan, it's gonna look like this. So it's like it's like a fan, big fan. Okay. So we say this fanning out. I think I'll just write it somewhere. Oh, I didn't. It's a fan out. So that means what? That means after post-school education, post-school investment in human capital, who's more likely to do it? Higher education or low education? Who are more likely to get trained? High education group or low education group? High education group. Okay. So high education group, not only they start with higher level of human capital just after school, they invest more in their human capital. So their earnings will grow up much faster than those who have lower education group. Okay. Why? Because if you think about it, training and education are very similar activities, like investment. Okay, it's just the two different types of investment in human capital. So if you have some characteristics that make you invest more in schooling, that same characteristics will make you invest more in training. Okay, you are likely to have, for example, low discount rate. Okay, so you are more patient. So you are willing to invest now in expectation of higher return in the future. Okay? That makes you to go to school more, and that makes you to invest more even after schooling. So later, when they actually get the return, then you have much more, bigger difference by education. Okay? So that's generally true. I think you will experience it in your life. When you meet your high school friend, okay, very similar while you are young, very similar. It's not that different. But when you are 40, 50, very different. Okay, it's like here, here. So there's a huge difference. Okay, that's for men. How about women? For women, this is the actual line. First thing is that what you can see compared to men, it's very flat. Okay, that means what? Human capital investment after finishing school is much less for women than for men. Okay, that's one thing. Okay. University is the exception. Okay, so they invest in human capital, but not any other group. So that's one thing. There is some fan out. Okay. But in this case, Korea's case is much more flat. In the US, actually, this is the man and this is for women. And as you can see that the US is similar. The men are actually much steeper than women. It's basically the same. And similar, is it similar picture? Yeah, in a sense. For women, it is much more flat and men are much more. So, In summary, highly educated workers earn more than less educated workers, and earnings rise over time at a decreasing rate. Okay. And the age earnings profile, they fan outwards. Okay. The profiles of different cohort diverge over time. That's what I just said. So highly educated workers invest most in training. Okay. So that's why their age differential gets bigger and bigger while they get older. And in Korea's case, the man's age earnings profile is steeper than the women's. Okay, so there must be a difference in terms of level of investment in human capital after school. Okay, I think we should finish here today, and then next class we will do wage structure.